Pleasure to introduce the Venezuelan Foreign Minister, Jorge Arreaza. He has held several important positions in the current Venezuelan government, as well as in the government of President Hugo Chavez. He was Vice President of Venezuela from 2013 to 2016, and he was simultaneously Area Vice President for the Social Development and Revolution of the Missions, as well as the Minister of University Education, Science and Technology from 2016 to 2017. He was appointed Foreign Minister in 2017. Welcome to the Foreign Minister.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad and honored to be here and to have this unusual opportunity to share and to exchange our vision and opinions with the people of Canada. As a Minister of Foreign Affairs, what I must say, in Venezuela, we are ministers of the popular power of foreign affairs or any other ministry. And we usually meet or talk to the governments, to the people that rule. But in this opportunity, I have this gift from life, and I can talk to the real heart of Canada, directly to your people, and that is important. I must greet all the social movements from Canada and from other places that have connected with this conference. And thank you, Blanca. Blanca said at the beginning, as Roger said, you were very eloquent and you really gave important information to put us in context. And Roger, my brother, thank you for your solidarity always, and especially for understanding the Bolivarian Revolution and many processes in Latin America that we always find difficult to explain because of this blockade of the media and all the sources of information. But Roger Waters has always understood and has shared with us our struggle, our victories, our defeats, and that's why I'm really honored for him to be here. And I know he wants to have more information. He always asks for more information about Venezuela, and he probably will at least sing something, part of a song, or play something at the end. So we must say that the diplomatic relationship between Venezuela and Canada historically was pretty smooth and stable. Before the Bolivarian Revolution, it was mainly diplomatic. And after the Bolivarian Revolution, it even became more close. And we had many business exchanges for investment, for Canadian investment in Venezuela. We had companies that came to Venezuela, worked in Venezuela, and it was a better time for our relation. But suddenly, something happened in 2016. And if you remember, 2016 is the year of the election of Donald Trump. But especially everything happened in 2017. Trump was already in office. And there was a radical change of attitude, of behavior from the Canadian government against the Venezuelan government. So somehow, especially through the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, she began to question everything about Venezuela. And covered by this umbrella, by this mask of the defense of human rights, they began to intervene to every single day there was a different interference of Canada in our internal affairs. They promoted political violence. 2017 was a difficult year for Venezuela. And when President Maduro found a way out, which was not repression with the military, which could have been the solution or a solution in 48 hours. But after 4 months of daily demonstrations, violent demonstrations, people dying because the opposition in some parts of our main cities had control of the streets, these so-called guarimbas, and blocking the streets in Venezuela. When President Maduro found a democratic solution, which was conveying the Venezuelan people to vote to elect a National Constituent Assembly, which is a figure, very democratic, the most pure figure of this constitution, then Canada, but especially after the United States said so, decided to, in advance, not to recognize the election of the National Constituent Assembly. And then after this election, which was difficult, but I must say, the last day of demonstrations, the last day that a Venezuelan died during these riots, the last day where public buildings were set on fire and they even destroyed some voting stations all over the country, was the day of the election. When the opposition and the White House witnessed that more than 8 million Venezuelans went out to vote, they decided, they realized what they had done, and they couldn't even gather 20 people anymore in the streets. So it was a democratic victory for the Venezuelan people. Then we had elections for the governors in the states of Venezuela, and we won 19 out of 23 states. Then we had elections for the mayors, the municipalities, and we won 308 out of 335. And Canada didn't recognize the results of these elections. And I must say that especially the elections of the governors of the states, all the opposition participated. But they said in advance there was going to be fraud during these elections. So we were really surprised. Why was Canada following the steps of the United States? Why was Canada even taking the blows, putting their face to say things that the United States, because of the very bad reputation they have in the Latin American countries, couldn't say? So Canada began to be in the front line of the aggression against Venezuela. And we had really no idea what was happening. Why Canada? We always saw Canada as a bridge, as an actor with whom we could establish dialogue and search for dialogue with the United States and even other parts of the world. But it was not the case, and always using the liberal framework of the defense of human rights. So you know that Prime Minister of Canada, Mr. Trudeau, is nothing like his father, I must say. And he has had some differences with the Trump administration, especially the climate change, trade agreements, etc. And what we really believe and conclude is that they had these important differences. So Venezuela was an easy card to agree upon. So that's what they did. They said, okay, we have these fights, but let's agree about Venezuela. We will do what you can't do. Let us organize the Grupo de Lima, the Lima Group. No, it won't be you directly, Mr. Pompeo. It's going to be Cristia, it's going to be Trudeau. It's going to be easier if we do it this way. Because if the United States is a member of the Grupo de Lima, no one is going to give any credibility to this group, because they will believe that it is the United States with its regime change policy trying to attack Venezuela. And we also must say that there is a second reason or motivation that produces this aggression from Canada against Venezuela. It is related to the oil interests, these big companies in Alberta, this state of Canada, where you produce heavy oil, just like Venezuelan oil, heavy oil. And the refineries, especially in the south of the United States, in Texas, in Florida and other parts, are designed for the Venezuelan oil, for heavy oil, because traditionally it was Venezuela that supplied this petroleum, this oil to these refineries. And now, because of this aggression against Venezuela, because of these sanctions against Venezuela, the oil from Canada is substituting the one that the oil from Venezuela. So there was a clear interest, but there was also some interest from some companies like Cristalex, which was a mining company in Venezuela that, how do you say, empresa maletín? It's like a fake company, which never existed, really, because its name is Cristalex, because it was created for a region in Venezuela where the important gold mines called Cristinas. So it was Cristalex. And they had a lot of struggles and fights with the miners in Venezuela, the small miner in Venezuela, and they didn't make an important investment. But at some point, President Chavez decided to nationalize all the gold industries, and these companies were asked to leave Venezuela. So they went to an arbitration process, and suddenly, during these last years, we lost this arbitration process, and that money that the Republic of Venezuela, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela owes, that has to pay, well, it should be to this Cristalex so-called company. But it is related to Canada, it's Canadian, and they have links with this member of parliament, Juan Guaido. I must say that nobody knew Juan Guaido before he raised his hand in the middle of a demonstration in the street and self-proclaimed as president of our country. And many Venezuelans have forgotten his name. They, with some difficulty, they learned to write to the spelling of his name, and now they have even forgotten it. So all this business interest came into this new chess game, and Canada was in the vanguard of this aggression against Venezuela. We must remember that this Grupo de Lima, this Lima Group, was created because the United States didn't manage to have all the votes they needed in the OAS, in the Organization of the American States, in order to expel Venezuela or to apply the Democratic Charter of the Americas and intervene Venezuela, especially because they couldn't convince the ALBA countries and the countries of the CARICOM, the Caribbean nations. They never had the 24 votes they needed, so they even didn't have the 18 votes at the beginning, so they created this Lima Group, which is an informal group. It is not legal, it's not registered in any international organization, and it meets to attack Venezuela. And it's usually, well, the chair of this group is Peru, usually, but that's formal. The real orders and instructions are given by Canada, but especially from the US, from Washington to Canada to the Grupo de Lima. And in the last meetings they have had, they have even connected with video conferences with Pompeo. The United States is not a member of the group, and Pompeo tells them what to do. And in the terms of the agreements that they sign at the end of this. And this Grupo de Lima has, for them, this constitution doesn't exist. They can appoint the president of Venezuela. They can tell which countries have to block Venezuela. They can sanction all the Venezuelans. They can say anything about the Venezuelan internal issues. They can even create the conditions to attack Venezuela. Because I must say, and that is something that goes against the human rights and against the peace policy of Canada, they have even tried to activate the Rio Treaty. The Rio Treaty, which is a treaty signed by some of the states of the Americas, was initially signed in 1955, if I'm not mistaken. And the spirit of this treaty, which is a military treaty, a defense treaty, is to help one another, the countries of Latin America, of the Americas, from Canada to Argentina and Chile, when there is an extra continental actor that is going to wage a war against one of the member states. So in 1982, you remember the War of the Malvinas, the Falklands, like the British say, and Argentina tried to invoke the Rio Treaty, and the United States supported the Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and not Argentina. So this treaty really had no sense. It was never really enforced. It was never used formally. But since 2018, they have been gathering, doing these meetings, and taking some steps. And Canada has been in the center of these events. And this means that they want to create the conditions in order to attack Venezuela, to invade Venezuela, because they want to take control of our country and its wealth, its natural resources, and of course they want to eliminate the ideology of our government, of our people, I must say, which comes since our indigenous people who believed in the collective property, property, and who believed that things could be done different, but also has a lot to do with all our history, with socialism. But it's our socialism. It's not the Cuban socialism. It's not the Chinese socialism. It's not the Vietnamese socialism. It's the Venezuelan socialism. It's democratic. It has elections. It has many political parties from the extreme left to the extreme right. And it is our right to establish our own political system. It's enshrined here in the Charter of the United Nations, which Canada and the United States, but we are talking about Canada, is violating since at least 2016, 17, when it comes to Venezuela. So here we are, and then in 2019, there was a plan, which was not decided in 2019. It was discussed in the Grupo de Lima and in other groups and instances, and it was launched in 2019, but it really began in 2018, during December 2017 and February 2018, there was a political dialogue process in Dominican Republic. The host was the president of Dominican Republic. Former president of Spain, Rodríguez Zapatero, was there. And the right-wing opposition and the Venezuelan government sat, and we agreed on many topics. And we had the agreement already printed. And the media was there the February the 7th of 2018. And everything was set. And our delegation arrived with their pens in their hand to sign the agreement. And when the delegation of the opposition arrived, they said there was nothing to agree upon, there was nothing to sign, because they couldn't reach an agreement with the dictatorship, the tyrant, Maduro, and all this narrative against their own country. So what happened was that we kept on with the agreement unilaterally. We went to the presidential elections, which were due to happen in 2018, and this opposition didn't register for the elections, so President Maduro was almost alone. That's not what we wanted. There was an important candidate from the opposition, but he was not the best one of them. He, before he had been the chief of campaign of Enrique Capriles, the candidate against Comandante Chavez in 2012. So the traditional parties boycotted the elections. The European Union, the US, Canada, in advance said that they wouldn't recognize the results of the elections. So this was a plan. It was activated at that same moment, February the 7th. And they decided not to recognize the Venezuelan constitution, the president that was going to be elected, but they had to wait until the 10th, January the 10th, when this constitution sets the inauguration of the government that was elected the year before. And President Maduro was sworn as president and formally, and he became the president of the United States, of Venezuela, elected but not recognized by the United States and these other countries. And at some point, January the 23rd, this man, Guaido, went to a demonstration, raised his hand, declared himself, self-proclaimed himself as president of Venezuela, and the plan was in place, was happening. At the beginning, it was ridiculous, and we even laughed, I must say. I said, this man is absolutely crazy, what is he doing? But then a new method of the international relations happened. The Twitter, Mr. Mike Pence tweeted, recognizing Guaido as the president of Venezuela. Then Mr. John Bolton, I almost don't even remember him well. And then Mr. Mike Pompeo, I'm talking the same day, the 23rd of January. And in the evening, Mr. Donald Trump. So that was the recognition that Guaido was looking for. And it happened. That was the plan. Then, a couple of days after that, Canada recognized this man who nobody elected, nobody voted for him. And then the Europeans took a little long. Oh, Mr. Borrell, who was then the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, said that the Americans convinced them that Maduro was already out of power. It was a matter of not weeks, but days. So they set an ultimatum, a deadline to the Venezuelan government. Maduro, if you don't call for new elections, then we are going to recognize Guaido. You have 8 days. So 8 days passed, and they actually recognized Juan Guaido, expecting that Maduro was going to be overthrown and that Guaido was going to be in power in sooner or later that month. Of course, it never happened. We never thought it could even happen. When I met with Elliot Abrams in the United Nations facilities for the first time, well, when we sat down, Carlos Ron was my vice minister, who's here with me, was with me, Samuel Moncada, our representative to the UN, was there. When we sat down, he almost said, let's negotiate the terms of your surrender, of your capitulation. Where is Maduro going to fly? Where is he? Is he going to go to Cuba, to some Caribbean country? Do you want to stay here in the United States? You are an honest man, you're not corrupt, so we're going to protect your family here. Please come to the right side of history and all that. I won't say the word that I'm thinking about. And when I told him, hey, Mr. Abrams, I think this is a different meeting because I'm here to tell you that we are not going to accept your interference in Venezuelan internal affairs and that you must stop. We want to have dialogue with you, but only if you respect us. And President Maduro has been elected last year and he's going to be in office at least until 2025. Maybe he becomes our candidate again and even longer. So please respect our internal affairs. And he said no. So he thought it was going to be like a sprint, 100-meter sprint. And I told him at the end of that meeting, Mr. Abrams, this might be a marathon. If you are going to keep on attacking Venezuela and trying to impose this fake government and this regime change policy, this is going to be a marathon, and we are experts. And Maduro is an expert when it comes to marathons. So he laughed about it. But the next time we met, which was after this event that Roger was talking about, this so-called event and concert for the humanitarian aid for Venezuela that Canada supported, you know, and Mr. Branson organized and put a lot of money for this concert to happen. Well, after that we met, and I told him, you see, Mr. Abrams, that nothing happened, that our military are respecting our constitution and our government, and that your coup d'etat failed. And he said, okay, if it failed, I must accept it until, at least until now. Then we are going to apply the maximum pressure strategy. And we have a lot of allies. And in his list, Canada was always the first one to be mentioned. And we're going to press you. There are going to be sanctions. You're going to be almost, strangled. And your people are going to rebel against you and your military. If not, something else will happen, but you will not last in power. So think about it. Tell Maduro to resign and all this is. I told him he was absolutely out of any real situation of the reality. So, but talking about Canada again, when these elections happened, which that was March, which was April, what? Maduro.
May 2018.
May the 20th of May, 2018. The only country in the world, the only government in the world that stopped, that forbid the Venezuelans from voting in this election was the government of Canada. We were not authorized to install the voting stations, the voting centers in our consulates or in other facilities that you usually rent for these events. We didn't have the permission of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Canada. So the Venezuelans that wanted to vote for Maduro or for Henry Falcon or for the other candidates couldn't vote. No. The only Venezuelans in the world that didn't have the right to vote were the Venezuelans in Canada, living in Canada. Do you really support democracy? Avoiding the Venezuelans, forbidding the Venezuelans the right to vote? That's absolutely absurd. So you see the madness of this policy against Venezuela. Then, of course, you already know that Canada didn't recognize our government. They almost immediately recognized Guaido, and maybe who knows, because this interim government, which as we call the Narnia government. So Canada has been playing a role to try to impose a government in Venezuela in order to be able to steal, to rob our wealth. That's what they are doing, and that is what Guaido is doing. They had their own interpretation of this constitution in Canada, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They thought they could be above the Venezuelan constitution. They supported Guaido, and I must say that they did a lot of lobbying all over the world with their ambassadors, but especially in the Caribbean. The former ambassador to Venezuela, Culham, I think it's his last name, traveled from one country to the other, one island to the other, and lobbying, trying to convince these countries, these governments, to de-recognize Maduro and to recognize this crazy man, Guaido. So that's something that really happened. And I must say, for instance, in the recent years, the Office of Protocol has come to the absurdity of requesting our diplomats to work with Guaido's illegal ambassador. There's a man, what's his name? Vieira Blanco, a rich Venezuelan who used to tweet from his Porsche, his car in Miami. He was appointed ambassador of the Narnia government to Canada. So they are telling our ambassador and our staff in our embassy in Ottawa to work for this man. That's what the protocol office of that ministry is trying to do. And I must say that this man is part of an NGO, the Canadian Venezuelan Engagement Foundation, they became one of the first beneficiaries of the CITGO programs. CITGO, our company, our energy company in Texas and in other parts of the US, it has more than, I believe, 2,000 gas stations all over the US, refineries. This was confiscated by the US. But CITGO used to pay for social programs, for health programs, for Venezuelans abroad, in Italy, in Argentina, for very chronic and difficult diseases. So they stopped funding these programs, and they began to give that money to these NGOs. One of them is the NGO of the so-called ambassador of Juan Guaido to Canada. So this is unethical, really. It's immoral. It's something really crazy. There are deep ties from corporate Canada to this Narnia Guaido so-called government. The man who Guaido initially designated as alleged state attorney to litigate against Venezuela in foreign courts, Jose Ignacio Hernandez, and who has to oversee Venezuelan interests, had previously worked for the private law firm and developed the legal justification for CITGO to be used to pay Crystalex, that's Crystalex, the mining company I told you at the beginning, at this arbitration award. Likewise, when Guaido went to Ottawa earlier this year, Scotiabank representatives praised him and called for supporting him against President Maduro. It's all about business. They want to control Venezuelan wealth. They want to control Venezuelan oil, Venezuelan gold, Venezuelan diamonds, Venezuelan coltan, Venezuelan bauxite, Venezuelan iron and everything, and water and biological diversity and everything. That is what they are doing. Well, let's talk about sanctions. The Canadian government is supposed to defend human rights. You know what really threatens and even impacts at the worst level the human rights in Venezuela or in Iran or Syria or Cuba or Mozambique and other countries? Sanctions. And Canada has sanctioned more Venezuelan officials than the US government, even more. But they have supported this policy of sanctions from the US, and they take their own sanctions and they try to block any Canadian for investing in Venezuela. So how can this be for the defense of the human rights of the Venezuelan people? How can this contribute to a democratic solution among the Venezuelans? That's all hypocrisy from this Canadian government. We would like to have respect from the Canadian government. We would have to have some respect from the government of the United States. Hopefully, if there is another government, another president in the United States, the first thing we will do is ask him for dialogue and his team. Let's sit down. Let's go back to the framework of the international law. Let's respect the Venezuelan Constitution. We will respect you, even though we have profound differences. We believe in socialism. You believe in neoliberalism and capitalism, but we can work together and we can respect each other. We would do that with any Canadian government, even with this government, if they have any kind of reflection of rectification of what they have been doing. So I must also tell you that these sanctions, they have been hard on Venezuela. And it's been 4 rounds of sanctions. And for instance, no persons in Canada or Canadian persons outside of Canada can trade property, carry out some sanctions, provide financial services, work for anyone on the CIMALIS, that is this act that they are approved in the Canadian Parliament. Likewise, under the Magnitsky Act, people listed have their accounts frozen and they are declared inadmissible to Canadian territory. I remember reading this material that I was sanctioned by Canada. I couldn't remember. I didn't remember. I was reading for this conference and I realized, okay, I was sanctioned by Canada as well and by the US. Why? I have no idea, really. It's just an aggressive act. Huh? Yeah, Larry DeBoy, who works for the Venezuelan government and is in charge of the Council of Human Rights of the Venezuelan state, he who defends the human rights of the Venezuelan people was also sanctioned by the Canadian government. And only people that were elected as members of the National Constituent Assembly were sanctioned because they were elected, because the people voted for them. People that organized them, for instance, the National Electoral Council members were sanctioned because they organized an election. They facilitated the Venezuelans their right to vote, something that Canada government stopped and forbid in the 2018 presidential elections. So even some Venezuelan athletes, fencing teams, military athletes that were traveling to Canada for important competition games, they were not issued the Canadian visas because they were Venezuelans. I mean, that's really it's a segregationist, racist. It's really, I never thought that any Canadian government could do such a thing. And I wanted to share with you, I insist, if Mr. Champagne of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Canada wants to have a conversation with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, I can call him and we can have a phone call right now. If he wants to meet with me in Ottawa, in Caracas, in Mexico City, in Beijing or whatever, I can travel whenever he wants, because we believe that we should respect Canada and Canada should respect Venezuela and not interfere in the Venezuelan internal affairs. And Canada should, if they really want to defend the Venezuelans' human rights, then they should stop sanctioning Venezuelans and they should stop supporting the sanctions and the blockade that the United States has imposed to the Venezuelan people. We cannot use the banking system in the world. We cannot buy imports, food or medicine. And when we do it through traders and third actors, it is 4 or 5 times much more expensive than if it was directly. We cannot make any trade with Canada, with the United States, which are the main producers of everything in this part of the world. Even the ships the tankers that transport oil from Venezuela are stopped, are persecuted. The Navy companies are persecuted all over to stop transporting oil from Venezuela. Our industry, our PDVSA, the oil industry in Venezuela, is not producing enough because we cannot import the chemicals they need, the drills they need, the spare parts they need. They cannot export their oil. Citgo, which was a very important way of having also income for PDVSA, was seized by the US government. So they are trying to strangle the Venezuelan people. So that's why I wanted to read. I didn't bring the book. I forgot the book at home, but I printed these pages. And it's really important for me to share this. This is a book called or named The Art of Sanctions. It was written by a professor named Richard Nephew. Richard Nephew used to be the main advisor of Barack Obama for the sanctions against Iran. And he studied all this sanction strategy against other countries. And he just very sincerely wrote a book where they undisguise themselves and show themselves openly. So he says, no, that the general framework of the sanctions, no, the goals of the sanctions, should follow these steps. And he says this more than 10 times over the 230 pages of his book. First, identify the objectives for the imposition of pain. Listen to this, pain. Imposition of pain, and define minimum necessary remedial steps that the target state must take for pain to be removed. Second, understand as much as possible the nature of the target, including its vulnerabilities, interests, commitments to whatever it did to prompt sanctions, and readiness to absorb the pain. So he's confessing that what they do with the sanctions is impose and produce pain on the people. That's really, it's not only in breach of this charter, of the Declaration of Human Rights, of any international treaty. This is in breach of the human nature, and it shouldn't be allowed in the international relations. Then they say, the third step, develop a strategy to carefully, methodically and efficiently increase pain on those areas that are vulnerabilities while avoiding those that are not. So on the second step, you identify the most weak of a society, of this country that is object of sanctions, and you hit them directly. You try to kill them. You produce pain, disease, suffering, and then you will see if the sanctions are successful or not. Then there is monitor the execution of the strategy and continuously recalibrate its initial assumptions of target state resolve, the efficacy of the pain applied in shattering that resolve, and how best to improve the strategy. Then they say they have to give these countries a framework of what the minimum steps that they must take in order for the sanction to be removed. That means that I have to surrender. I have to capitulate. I have to do what you want. So I have to tell President Maduro, forget about the 9 million people that voted for you, and step down, because in order for the sanctions to be removed, Juan Guaido and Crystal X and the people of the companies, oil companies, Chevron and BP and others are going to rule Venezuela, because that's the will of Donald Trump, John Bolton, and the corporative imperialism that wants to rule the world. That's something we would never do. We would never betray the confidence that the Venezuelan people has given the Bolivarian revolution for over 20 years. There is an aggression to Venezuela, which is political, yes, diplomatic, it's economic, with the sanctions, the blockade, with all this trying to strangle the Venezuelan. It is also a media aggression, trying to demoralize the Venezuelan people and to make the people believe that we are drug dealers, narco traffickers, we are dictators, tyrants, that we kill the people in the streets if they think differently, that we want to eradicate the opposition. That is all false. That is all lies. That is what they are trying. They are working on their own public opinion to create the conditions, like they did in Panama, or they did in so many places, in Iran against Saddam Hussein, and whatever, in Libya against Gaddafi, in Syria against al-Assad, create this public opinion environment in order to justify whatever attack, aggression, military or not, against Venezuela. That is what they are trying to do. And our people has a high level of awareness, of consciousness, and we would defend the Venezuelan homeland with missiles, with tanks, with airplanes, with pistols, with rifles, with knives, with sticks, with spoons, with stones, and whatever we find. So it wouldn't be easy. And many people would die in Venezuela, and probably our country would be destroyed. But maybe the outcome of an invasion in Venezuela would be even worse than the Vietnam War, because we would know how to resist. Our Bolivarian armed forces know what to do. Our militia forces, which is the reserve of the armed forces, know what to do. And we, each one of us, would know what to do. That's not what we want. We want our country to be respected, our sovereignty to be respected. This charter and this constitution, Charter of the United Nations, this constitution, the Declaration, Universal Declaration on Human Rights, to be respected when it comes to Venezuela, and to let us follow our own path. That is all that we want. What can we do with Canada? I don't know. But I am sure that they are in breach of international law. They have the opportunity always to rectify and to make things better and to sit with us. There were some meetings of Chrystia Freeland with Bruno Rodriguez, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba, and they wanted to convince Cuba, to convince Maduro to step down. That's not what we want. Cubans thought that they wanted to use Cuba as a bridge with the Venezuelan government. They didn't. They just wanted to use Cuba, and of course, Bruno told them, go away. We're not even going to discuss this with you. There's a government in Venezuela, there's a president in Venezuela. You should respect that government and you should talk to that government. It never happened. So, I'm going to stop with this. The only occasion, the only time I had to have any kind of exchange with Chrystia Freeland was in the General Assembly of the OAS. The last General Assembly that Venezuela attended, because we were in the process of retiring from the OAS, and we had to stay for 2 years to comply with the OAS charter, although we had already officially said that we were going to, how do you say, to leave. There's another expression. And that time, but she took the floor. She said, I don't know how many things about my president, my country, my government. And then I had the time to answer. And the first thing I told her that she had a beautiful last name, Freeland, and that Venezuela was a free land, and that she shouldn't interfere in Venezuelan affairs, and that we have had a very smooth relationship with Canada historically, and that we should recover and resume that kind of relation, and that they should stop being the slaves of the United States when it came to Venezuela, doing what they wanted, organizing Lima Groups and imposing sanctions against Venezuela, and we should talk. Of course, she almost went, she was hysterical. She said she would never talk to us, that we were dictators and whatever. So I believe that you in Canada, for the social movements, the political parties, the universities, the think tanks in Canada, people that really understand the Canadian society, you should press your government. Not only for your government to respect Venezuela, but to respect the other countries. There are many things happening against Nicaragua in Latin America. Many things would happen against look what happened in Bolivia. A coup d'etat that was planned and funded by the United States. And now they're trying to organize the elections, and they have postponed the election once and again because the party of Evo Morales, the MAS, el Movimiento al Socialismo, would win in the first round of those elections. And they are persecuting, they are saying that Evo Morales, accusing him for felony and whatever, because they want him in jail, and the candidate, Luis Arce, also, and the candidate for vice president as well. So that is what the empires do. And I must always remember this. The empire is not the United States. The empire is, of course, not the people of the United States. We respect and we love and admire the people of the United States. The empire goes beyond. It's also countries in Europe, but it's not the countries. It's not the people of Europe. It's not the British people. It's not the French people. It's this set of corporations, of transnational interests, of lucrative corporations that exploit the human beings, the workers, and that, as Eisenhower said, this military industrial complex, it's also financial, technological, they take the decisions in the capitalist world. They tell the governments what to do. That's why Trump became a president. They want to be sincere, to be very honest about, and let's put a businessman, a very rich man, because then we are already, we take the mask and we are already obvious of what we are. So we have to have this always present into account. We have to stop the empire. Imperialism has to be stopped. But that doesn't mean a war against the United States. That doesn't mean aggression against Canada. That means that the people should take power through elections, through democratic means, and that the people of Canada should decide their own future and not this group, this plutocracy, the government of the rich, these oligarchies all over these countries linked to these corporations. So I wanted to stop it here, and then I'm sorry if it was too long, but I needed to say many things about Canada and to the Canadian people. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the foreign minister. We get such a one-sided perspective here in Canada, and it's critical that people hear directly from you to understand Canada's contribution to the suffering of the Venezuelan people. These are not things that we see in the media. So I thank you for taking the time to offer this perspective on how we're leveraging our good name, the commercial impacts, interests and their impacts on our policies, the diplomatic absurdities that have arisen. And you mentioned dialogue. We at the Institute believe debate is the lifeblood of democracy. And as a bit of backstory, we actually tried to set up a debate with Vice Minister Carlos Ron and Venezuelan Special Advisor Alan Cullum. He refused. We approached a few other officials, Ben Roswell, and didn't hear back. So this is actually how this event came to be. So I want to thank you again for being so generous with your time and expression of these concerns.